when I sat in a round table at Sheffield College, where we were hosted by a team of very, very enthusiastic youngsters in the culinary and service field. The perspectives that I've noted are those that are around a people-centered cultures. This is an emphasis on teamwork and people-first values. It is crucial in the hospitality sector, and whether it's the hospitality or whether it is the service sector by and large. I think at that table, I also cited an example as to the one organization which I think does best at loyalty recognition, and that's a BP petrol station. So it doesn't have to be a Crown Plaza or a Fairmont or a Four Seasons hotel. Leadership training that embeds these values can lead to better employee engagement. And as we will see later on in the document, employee engagement, whether it be through leadership or employees into the organization, is vital. The experiential value proposition, this whole feeling of desiring a true value for money proposition in everything that we are seeking to buy or to be entered into as part of an experience. People are looking for experiences. They're not just looking for an interaction. They're looking for an experiential event. AI and customer service has been spoken about, and that will be alluded to in this paper as well. While there is definitely a keen interest in how we view and how we use AI in the hospitality sector, which is a very touchy-feely part of the business, we can see how it can be used back of house to be a lot more efficient in the way in which we do things, the way in which we manage process. However, when it still comes to the actual fine delivery, people still demand that human touch. The inclusive recruitment process is another perspective, which I have come to understand through this process. There is a willingness to engage with diverse candidates and support those further from the labor market. However, more needs to be done to overcome barriers to inclusive recruitment and improve the sector's image. Now, a lot of the narrative was around hospitality or service industry being extremely unpleasant in terms of working hours, length of working hours, days of the week, hours of the day in which one works. However, if there's something that we learned post-COVID, was the ability to flex and to become a lot more efficient with how we use the FTE component of a person's workday. And so that we're able to accommodate some of those anomalies and the needs of our labor force. Collaboration with education providers. Employers are open to working with education providers. It is obviously through the need to work on the apprenticeship programs, as many other industries are doing, but also realizing that doing the apprenticeship route is also highly charged with cost. However, what we have also understood is the limited level of understanding that some of our fellows around the table could possibly have with the utilization of the apprenticeship levy. I think it needs to be underscored, and this is referencing various channels of information. Lifestyle and hospitality, community-centric and quality-focused business, here in Sheffield in particular, has grown by 2.4% in 2024. This is higher than London and Manchester, of all places. So this expansion reflects a consumer shift towards community-focused venues, offering a far higher quality product. We'll also notice that there's an uplift of 4% in the pub industry, but a decline in the nightclub industry, which is an interesting shift of customer requirements. The whole piece around leisure and well-being, inclusive and modernized facilities. We know here in Sheffield, for example, the City Council's Leisure Strategy 23 to 33 underscores a commitment to modernize the facilities to be more inclusive and welcoming, with an earmarked over £100 million investment for these areas and upgrades in these areas. The culture and creativity, strategic growth and global recognition. How do we collectively, as the hospitality industry in Sheffield, work in a collaborative manner that makes the region win as opposed to individuals underpinning other people in terms of rate or other services? How do we come together in a collaborative effort to win over the likes of Manchester, Liverpool, London, etc. for events? The events and festivals market has grown exponentially here in Sheffield and will continue to grow with the likes of Tramlines, Dockfest, and the latest introduced Crosswires Podcast Festival, etc., only just to name a few. The regional impact, Yorkshire's cultural ascendancy. Beyond Sheffield, Yorkshire as a whole is experiencing a cultural surge, with artists and creatives gaining national and international recognition. With all of this as simple observations from the paper, in which you are now going to learn a lot more, I see the phenomenal amount of opportunity that exists in this industry here in the region, but underpinned by a collaborative effort that is required by all, and in particular, how to enthuse people to join this incredible industry. And it's not just an industry which is for those that are at university looking to shore up their bank accounts, or just to have some beer spending money at the end of the day, but truly making a career out of what is a very, very rewarding industry, absolutely altogether. Those are my perspectives to share, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the presentation and obviously fielding any questions that anybody may have for me at the appropriate time.
Thank you so much, Lou. Thank you for hosting us. Martin, thank you so much for those words. I can tell that you're deeply immersed in the industry, because the insights you reflect back to us, just show that you've seen how it's changing and how it is changing, and clearly got a passion for the industry. So thank you so much for taking the time to read through the report and introduce it. It's really appreciated. So a bit of background then. We're Cader Research. We're based in Sheffield, in Park Hill and Gateshead. We've been doing a number of studies across the sub-region, and we have been working closely with the chambers in South Yorkshire on local skills and improvement, on the local skills and improvement plan, to really look at employer insights and provide here and now insights on what employers are thinking in key sectors. Dan will say a little bit more at the end, just about some of the other things that we're doing, and just look to the future a little bit on some of the other employer insights that we've got. So background today then, we're going to talk about future priorities for the sector, current skills now, what are employers telling us now, what's training provision like currently, what does that look like, and what does employer engagement look like for this sector. So have a think as we go through. If there's any particular points that resonate with you, please do jot them down, and we'll hear from you after the talk. Thank you. Jack and I are going to share, because we both wrote the report, so we're going to share it a little bit. So this is the third of 5th employer insights. There are a further 2 planned as well. Typically, we wanted to speak to 20 to 30 employers. We actually merged 2 reports for this. So for this one, we've got 34 interviews, and we also did a roundtable with a further 6 representatives from the sector. I suppose the idea really is to just get employer knowledge and insights. It's quite a long questionnaire, and we did speak to principals and things to just work out originally what questions would you like? And we have tested those questions in 2 other previous employer insights. We've done a construction one and a manufacturing one, if you want to read those. So this one looks then at current and future skills. So we spoke to 34 firms. Clearly, they can't represent the whole sector, and it is quite a broad sector. And the idea is that they inform the valuable work of providers, decision makers across the sub-region. And what we've done with other areas, for instance, is that a college has taken a lead with providers to just reflect on the findings and respond back about what they think are the important points and what they're currently doing and what they hope to do. And we'd like to do a similar thing with this. So it's, as Martin mentioned, it's a really varied sector. It's a really dynamic sector, fast changing, very customer driven, covering all sorts of elements on that second bullet. If you look at the subsectors, Obviously, culture and heritage covers, community interest companies as well as companies and national portfolio organisations. We have seen a bit of explosion on the high street of leisure and entertainment as well, and sports centres. And as Martin says, lots of sports and coaching and leisure centres are reaching out into different parts of the community. So, elite sports is just one element of that. Community sports and wider sports is much wider. And really interesting to see that Yorkshire Sports are on the call today as well. So tourism, again, massive industry. I mean, for sport alone, there's many career pathways: health, well-being, fitness, teaching, training, coaching, management. Clearly, we can't cover everything in this report, so this is sort of high-level messages as well. Cultural industries, lots of different sub-industries there. So we've got designers, artists, creators, fashion designers, all sorts in that sector. So a really dynamic, important foundation industry for our sector, because we know that when people come to live and work in the city, and in a vibrant consumer-facing sector is really important for them. So future priorities then. So a couple of big points then. Employee engagement and motivation is really important. And that's something, I guess, one of the key findings that stuck out for me is that it results in an enhanced consumer experience. If you've got happy staff, they convey that onto their customers, and ultimately the employers are happy and the organizations are happy because the outcomes are good. So leadership training, as Martin mentioned, really can help managers embed these people first values. And that really was an important priority for people. And over the past 5 years, there has been some real turbulence, and Martin's mentioned some of that. And it is a tight labour market. In some parts of this sector, it is quite tight. It's also an area that's constantly reinventing itself. So you find the sector repositioning and diversifying, responding to that explosion of growth for the experiential market, and real changing patterns of consumer behaviour. Different nights of the week, different times, different types of experience, different things that people are looking for. So the employers really are looking for real world work readiness, and the soft skills, you can't underestimate the significance of them in this sector. So that means that communication were placed at a premium, plus the flexibility to respond to some of those changing circumstances that I talked about. And there are technical and higher level skills going into the sector, particularly the cultural sector, very technical and specialist skills there, and leadership skills to oversee the overall sort of customer engagement and support for new products, services, and diversification. So there's quite a lot of change within the sector. So you need a workforce that's really adaptable. Digital technology is used to enhance the customer experience, but it's fair to say it's yet to fully revolutionize operations across the piece. So there's a lot of front of office staff using these tools and processes. And what you find is the back office teams typically are using it on stock control or to improve operational efficiency, tickets, that sort of thing. So there is a demand for a constant flow of people into the industry with digital literacy training and familiarization with new technologies and supporting retraining and upskilling. So if people have come from other sectors, that's one area where training providers need to boost the confidence where there's transitions into the sector. There's been some quite high profile cases recently around cyber attacks, and that is a really important area for the sector. And typically there's quite sophisticated relationship with sort of software providers in this sector. And there may be scope to promote awareness of cyber resilient measures and accreditations. This is often provided by sort of independent providers. One thing, I don't know why it surprised me, but it did slightly. And you're the first people to hear these findings, by the way. So the report was only written on Friday. There is an increasing demand for green credentials. So I spoke to the CEO of Soster & Gren, for instance. He was telling me they don't have any plastic at all. And we're finding that the hoteliers that we spoke to, for instance, people are asking them what their carbon footprint is. So there is at the moment, it's largely a top-down sort of implementation of green initiatives, but that's definitely something that's pervading organizations and influencing the way they do things. I spoke to some restaurants and things, and they would like to do more in this area in terms of sort of sustainable development, but are limited by cost. Quite interesting. So connecting employers to AI, offering introductory AI training would be supported. And, people can see the potential of it, but they don't want to undermine those important personal interactions and connections that they've had. So I don't think we'll be seeing robot servers very, very quickly in Sheffield, but we will be seeing AI in some of those back office functions, doing some of the routine work around customer intelligence and engagement, social media, that sort of thing. So I think the sort of support there that's needed is masterclasses illustrating how AI could enhance back operations or service offers. And as it happens, we are doing a report on AI currently for the next phase of LSIP, so we will be able to consider what that might mean for people. Jack's kindly put some quotations from some of the findings. I wasn't going to go through them, but we're going to be sharing, Lou, the presentation afterwards. So anybody that wants the quotes can have them. And of course, they are in the report. They're just to bring a bit of flavour to some of the insights that we bring. We've got a couple of pictures of some of the bigger, customer-facing assets that we've got across the sector. We have two major global events, for instance, you will know about the Doncaster St Ledger and the Snooker. And there is an awful lot of organisation and support and cultural links to those organisations that goes on during those prelim events. So cultural skills, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Jack, who's going to tell you the here and now.
Yes. So we spoke to employers about sort of current skills, pipelines as well. As Maya mentioned, in terms of apprenticeships, there was a general receptiveness to the use of apprenticeships across sort of a wide range of businesses and sort of subsectors. I sort of thought one main key point really employers did mention is that while they would be receptive, it was only if they could offer meaningful support and if they could afford to. So there is an element of the cost as a barrier, which Martin touched on. Employers did also emphasise the importance of employability and essential skills, which we've already covered, and their sort of expectations around how this might factor into sort of apprenticeship training in the workplace. They would look at additional support like mentoring opportunities, and there was discussions around any sort of entry-level programs they'd like to see supporting the overcoming of digital and IT literacy barriers to help sort of new recruits overcome any confidence issues and address skills gaps that businesses have. Other concerns that were mentioned were obviously the capacity to supervise apprenticeships, the cost of the transport, and also just a general issue around sort of visibility within the ecosystem and a lack of understanding about where they can access support and apprenticeships. Hard to fill vacancies were also touched upon in our discussions. So there was a wide range. Obviously, the sector's quite broad in its definition, but industry-specific roles and positions that support the business more widely. Especially unsurprisingly, sort of shift work and kitchen roles were mentioned quite a lot as hard to fill vacancies. This is in part due to sort of low pay and the physical demands that are often associated with them. And that was often in the sort of retail hospitality sectors, and they sort of also touched upon experienced managers as well. It was quite a hard to fill vacancy. That was quite a challenge, often losing out to bigger competitors with sort of larger paychecks, and contractors are often used to sort of maintain customer standards. In terms of usual recruitment routes, word of mouth was probably the most common. Social media and external job sites were often cited. Local recruits, understandably, usually preferred for sort of the retail hospitality sectors, and trial shifts are quite common to sort of assess those softer skills, communication, and how people embed within a workplace. In terms of diversity and promoting recruitment opportunities, again, quite a wide openness to it. But as we sort of touched upon, the sort of softer skills, the presentability, that was something that kept really coming up in discussions. We also asked employers about career development and progression frameworks. Generally, these were quite informal. There were rarely often too many specific policies or frameworks. Temporary positions are quite common, but there's definitely some scope there to work with employers that sort of develop more tailored and job-specific career development frameworks to sort of cut down on high turnover and build up more longer-term employees. In terms of how they sort of engage with providers when it came to training, the sort of mandatory stuff, the first aid, health and safety was often via external providers, usually providers they've used quite frequently or often. Other training, because it was often quite specific to the job, it was usually handled internally by managers. But I think there is an appetite there to support employers in coaching and mentoring techniques. Induction processes, so many employers used it to complete training and set expectations. There was quite well developed induction processes, again largely done in-house, but I think there is scope there for sort of wider embedding of training at regular intervals to sort of facilitate more of career development. Naturally, flexible working common, compressed hours, quite a lot of autonomy over working hours, the ability to swap shifts. Obviously not as much in sort of the retail side of things, but home working did come into play in some of the sort of leisure and tourism businesses, but it wasn't really widespread. And then we asked businesses around employee well-being. So there wasn't as much formal or standardized employee well-being, but businesses were always sort of open to sort of have chats with their employees, and mental well-being was particularly something that was addressed as a key concern. And there was widespread sort of interest in accessing mental health first aid and awareness activity. But the sector is very good at sort of celebrating successes, both formally and informally, for its employees. So that was something that came up quite frequently.
The sector knows how to party.
Yes, yes, it does. Yeah, so we've got some pictures here, and then just again some more quotes from businesses. One in regard to their openness to adopting apprenticeships. One touched upon what I mentioned about hard to fill vacancies and sociable working hours. And then in terms of recruitment processes, again, trial shifts and sort of embedding people and checking they're right for the culture was something that came up a lot. So you can see that in the bottom quote there.
Thanks, Jack. So smaller firms we asked them about sort of training barriers and things, and resource was often mentioned for smaller companies. They're balancing increasing costs, changing consumer preferences, that sort of thing, and very practical limitations taking people out of the workforce. With the larger firms that are more likely to do formal training, they found it generally fine, but sometimes they were overly generic for their very specific needs, so they did need to tailor that. Cost and time are key barriers to formal training. There was obviously a preference in a fast-moving retail environments in particular for modular, flexible, short format training, and that's something we've heard quite a lot, particularly in those sectors where it's not as easy, for instance, construction and some of those others as well. Some had limited experience of engaging external training providers, and it's fair to say they found it hard to articulate their needs because they're not doing as much sort of working with providers. They didn't all have a great understanding of the provider offer. I mean, that's different with the larger hotels and the big chains and things, but some of the smaller ones, the more hand-to-mouth organizations, the SMEs, for instance, could probably do with help and just finding suitable training providers that meet their needs in particular. They typically recruited their leaders from within, bearing in mind Jack's earlier point about difficulties through internal development and promotion. And then it was quite common for leadership training to be offered to help them develop into that role from front of house to managing the house, if that makes sense. So they had CPD pathways for new and aspiring managers, and sometimes they could complete those in their own time. That reduces the strains on capacity and help address some of those leadership deficits, particularly where there's no training around. So the adaptability and personalization of content with real life scenarios is what the training providers asked us for. They want to see real, actual sort of customer experiences being built into the training. So much more practical, shorter modules, again, online, really popular. And training for existing employees was offered in response to changing business needs, entry-level courses, that sort of thing. Employers frequently need to keep up to date with regulations and new initiatives affecting retail and hospitality. So on-the-job training in that sense, you might bring a provider in to provide a very specific area of new skill that's required. So there's many upskilling opportunities. Often that's through shadowing. I spoke to some people running different chains of restaurants, and they move people around different departments. And in smaller businesses, you really get experience of all different elements. So a sort of mix and match approach. If the flexibility of the training could match some of the mix and match approach that employers are taking, that would be really helpful. AR and VR is a really interesting one because some people thought actually that could be a useful training tool or even an experiential experience in itself if we could use that. But it's fair to say there is some reservation within the sector about the use of AR and VR because of the adoption barriers, the cost. So they need convincing or introductory sessions were they to take it out. So there's a quote there about engaging with providers. There's something about recruiting from within there. And there's something about the flexibility of training, which is something we do hear quite a lot. And I know it's easy to comment on, more difficult to provide that sort of modular, very, very pick and mix type training. Jack's going to do the final bit and then I'll just bring it together and just we'll open it up if that's okay, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant. So we talked to employers about engagements with training providers, how this might look going forwards, and also a little bit in terms of looking back at recruitment, but those a little bit further removed from the labour market as well. So employers don't actively seek out those removed from the labour market when they're looking at their recruitment processes. They tend to keep it quite broad and open. It's not something they directly target. And as we touched upon in terms of those sort of people skills as the main focus, it's merit-based employment. So it's based on values, aptitudes, willingness to work is the main thing that companies were looking for. That said, some do work with specialised organisations to help in their recruitment, and others would like to hear about how they can adapt their recruitment process going forward to make them more inclusive. Things like blind CVs, more accessible training days, etc. We talked about inspiring the next generation as well, and how there's often misconceptions of how the sector looks and how it might be best to inspire those young people to want to work in the industry. So all the employers we spoke to emphasised that it's vital to sort of increase the visibility of the opportunities, and how certain parts of the sector may be undervalued or perceived overly negatively. In terms of how this would look, most are already engaging with employers, with other training providers to try and facilitate this. So they're working with education providers in terms of doing sort of positive case studies and success stories. Materials to highlight how it can be enjoyable and often really rewarding sector as well. And sort of tours, taster events and open days were mentioned quite a lot, and making sure that young people have that actual on-hand experience of what it's like rather than just speeches or talks in schools. So employers welcome funding for skills and speaking, curriculum and course development as well, and also to employ local people. We've already mentioned around placements, apprenticeships, also internships as well. Some employers are looking at and masterclasses as well to sort of help with careers education. So CVs, talks and short videos were all discussed. But again, there was that preference on sort of real life experience.
Yeah, thank you.
And we've got some quotes there from employer around work with those for the labour market. Again, less around focus on what people's background is, but more their willingness to work. Bits around sort of inspiring the next generation about how it's often not perceived as the most attractive industry, and sort of telling those stories of what a valuable occupation can be, and a little bit around provider engagement. So without providers seeing the day-to-day of industries, it's quite hard to often articulate what their needs are, which is something that Carl mentioned earlier.
Thank you so much. I quite enjoyed doing this paper because we don't often get to touch into the retail and hospitality skills sector. It's often a sector that's missed off. In South Yorkshire, we tend to cover the sort of creative, the manufacturing, and it was really interesting to hear their perspectives and the opportunities within the sector. We're going to carry on sharing these insights and discussing it with people and talking about what it means for them. We're currently writing an aviation studies report, which is due to report next week, looking at all the opportunities within that sector. Again, very different. We've had some fantastic interviews with sort of CEOs of financial and professional services companies across South Yorkshire. So I look forward to seeing what that one says. Again, very, very different, higher graduate entry level, that sort of thing. Some similar challenges, but some very, very specific requirements. And just to pique your interest, we have two looking to the future reports. One is about AI. These are a bit more thematic, these future topics. One is about AI, and I'm happy to share the questionnaire if anyone is interested in seeing that, and jobs of the future. We started that one. And the other one is around veterans in the workplace and the engagement of veterans and their experience within the workplace. Dan may wish to say more about that later. So I was going, Lou, if it's okay to you, is just to get some reflections for people and then hand to you to just close your bit and then hand to you, Dan, to finish off. Does that sound okay? Yeah. So, I mean, it'll be helpful just to hear what people think. Does that sound like what messages stood out for you? Are there things that we could do around what the employers have said to perhaps respond to some of those employer insights? I'd be interested to hear what you feel are the big messages. We sort of just presented them, really. We haven't really kind of, I guess we haven't kind of digested the significance of what we found, if that makes sense. Lou, should we just open it up and see what messages stood out for people? Does that make sense? As
yeah, that's great. Yeah. So I'm just going to move your co-host so then I can see the full screen of everyone. So who would like to come in with any questions or comments?
Should we? Martin, I'm interested, sorry to pick on you again, because I know you started, but I am interested to hear what you think, you know, what are the one or two big standout things for you, having digested, you know, what the employers said? Which bits particularly resonate with you, Martin? And, you know, I know you've got a major asset in the city centre, haven't you? So I'm sure you will have a view.
Yeah. It's difficult just to speak about this asset because we only provide one single service to the consumer outside of the Freeman, and that is a catering service. So whether it be for weddings, whether it be for conferences, meetings, or other social events. But I think that speaking on behalf of restaurants, cinemas, petrol stations for that example again, hotels, restaurants. I think the one thing that is a huge standout is the availability of people wanting to make this a career choice. You know, today, if you speak to a handful of university students, whether they are funded from the bank of mom and dad or whether they are funded from a gracious and generous loan, which they will then repay for the rest of their working life. That's entirely up to them, but they will all have experienced, the majority will have experienced catering as something they've done while at university. Now, these are people that could possibly be studying medical sciences. They could be studying sports medicine. They could be studying manufacturing, architecture, whatever the case may be, because we come across them here at Cutler's Hall. But none of them will actually make that transition into catering and say, you know what, I think I've chosen the wrong degree. I'm going to go into catering. And I think that what has happened over time is that people have seen catering as an opportunity to earn a quick buck with limited experience required to do it. And it's about how we can get people more interested in creating a career or forging a career in this industry, whether it's in the culinary arts, service, whether it be whatever is related to the hospitality and service, soft service industry. And that it is a meaningful, impactful career to have with very good progression opportunities.
Yeah.
Now, whether it's in the hiring process, I don't think so, because you've got to get people there in the first place, but it's in the attraction process. And I think that's where it all starts, is how do you attract people to this industry in the first place? Yeah. And it starts at schools. It starts, even just simply by having great experiences with their parents when they go to restaurants or hotels. Something that lights a flame in the belly, something that gives somebody that inspiration to want to go into the business. And my inspiration came from the fact that I used to travel a lot with my parents, and I had the opportunity to stay in, hotels, great, good, indifferent, around the world. And I think that's where I got my inspiration from. That's where I got my bug from. And the minute that I had an opportunity to go into the business, I stuck to it.
So
Martin, I've
maybe
just
maybe
seen
the
that-
hotels could be more open there. Sorry, Luke, on.
Yeah, no, I've just seen Jenny's comment in the chat, because that was one of the things I noted down from Martin's comments and yours, Carl, about raising the profile of the sector, it being an inclusive employer. Obviously, we've got the Pathways to Work project in South Yorkshire, so we've got a real opportunity with this whole visitor economy industry to help support the Pathways to Work. But just touching on Martin's point, Jenny, I don't know if you're happy to come in, but just how do we better link some of the people in these industries to some of the initiatives that exist about promoting career choices? Like in Sheffield, we've got See It Be It. But yeah, how do we profile, like, aspirationally, and profile some of the amazing careers that are available, so people don't just see it as a stopgap job to do while you're doing something else and just for cash? So yeah, do you want to come in, Jenny?
Yeah. I just thought it was really interesting that there's so many employers that are worried about their perception, how they're coming across as an industry to young people. And across South Yorkshire, like you mentioned, there's See It Be It in Sheffield. I'm doing a very similar project in Rotherham. There'll be projects that happen across Barnsley and Doncaster too. So I just wondered if these employers that you're speaking with, if they would be happy to take part in some of the events. We've got like I run projects myself, but we've also got the Give an Hour campaign where employers can sign up, and they have, like, it's a spreadsheet that's sent to them monthly, and they can look through, and all the school requests for things like careers fairs are on there. So employers can just cherry pick what fits with their timing. If any employers are Rotherham based, I could add them to my mailing list and happily tell them about career speed networking and Dragon's Den workshops. And I appreciate that in the industry that they're in, time is short. But again, if these employers were happy to, to get involved, we could just keep them notified and, dip in and out of whatever they can.
Yes.
That would
Sounds
be
like an easy win, doesn't it, Jenny?
Yeah, it really does. Like I say, if you're speaking to these employers and they feel like they're not getting their message across, and we're out there doing all these projects where, we're engaging with young people and we're sending, challenging misconceptions, it'd be great to get them involved.
Yeah.
So,
I am going to keep coming around the room because I would like to hear from everybody, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Yorkshire Sport next, Katie. Is that okay? I wouldn't mind just getting a sports perspective. We've done a bit of work, funny enough, for you as an organisation, looking at the benefits of health and well-being and moving more. We did look at it a bit as an industry, but we didn't look under the bonnet at the skills like we have here, Katie. I'm just interested to hear your take from a Yorkshire Sport point of view. What's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. Just for a little bit of context, you've got Chris Wright and Andy Maddox on the call as well. We all work collectively together.
Yeah.
This is from DCLT and Andy's from GDM, so please feel free to come in at any point. Yeah, I mean, just to kind of add a bit of context around some of the work that we do from a sport and physical activity point of view, we have local skills coming out of a company called SIMSPA, which is the Chartered Institute for Management of Performance for sport and physical activity. They're really kind of designed to deliver local skills accountability boards that will then create a local skills plan for sport and physical activity. And this work has been driving away within Doncaster and Sheffield over the last 2 years. So I just wanted to plug that really, and Chris Wright chairs the board in Doncaster for us. Reasons really is how can it link and how can it serve its purpose within this work? There's a lot of employer insight, there's stakeholders engaged in that planning process. So it'd be really good to have some time to really get to grips with what we've found and what we're working towards, which naturally does completely align with what we've seen and heard today on the presentation.
Yes.
From a sport and physical activity point of view, we've got probably quite a lot of concern around diversifying our workforce is a real theme that we're driving across Sheffield and Doncaster, but also looking at how we can absolutely support the career sector to understand the breadth and the plethora of what is attractable out there as well. We need to navigate and pivot a little bit from the typical entry points of sport and physical activity, and we also need to shift, or we feel that the demand there is to shift into a health and wellbeing space as well. So there's a lot of commonalities, but I'll just let the floor open to Chris and Andy if you want to input at all.
Chris, Andy?
Yeah, sorry, I'll jump in if I'm all right before Andy. I think there's been a few real strengths over the last 12 to 18 months in terms of what we're trying to do. We're working quite close with the colleges in Doncaster to see how we can influence the courses that they're delivering in the colleges, so that when the students leave and they come out, they are work ready and they do have a lot of those skills, which they might not have done if we'd not had that conversation. And actually, Ian Hamilton will probably back us up and say some of the changes they've made to those courses has been quite significant. And the latest conversation is around edging more towards the health and well-being agenda, because our sector is pivoting slightly. And when I say our sector, I do mean the traditional leisure, you know, as you might sort of think of leisure centres, that kind of thing. You know, we are pivoting more towards the health and well-being, which is a real focus for us. So we have obviously spoken to the colleges in Doncaster around how that could be influenced within the courses. But we've also been having the conversations, you know, and I think there's a real great case study here of where we're working with Active Together in Doncaster, and all the you know, I know Sheffield, Barnsley and Rotherham are doing the same. But we are working as a key partner now of Active Together. We are providing staff who are on a joint training programme with Doncaster and Bashett Little Teaching Hospitals, so they can upskill and deliver physical activity for people with underlying health conditions. So there's some real, and you know, so we're looking at the skills that we need in our sector and how we can plug those gaps. So there's some real sort of strengths and opportunities there. And I think one of the things that I was going to ask is around how do we capture what is potentially in some, if we think of our sector and the ones that we're focusing on, you know, if you were to sort of subsector it slightly, because it's quite a broad sector that we're talking about. If you were to subsector it, there's some changing landscapes within a lot of it, and it's how we can capture that and how we can move with it so that we don't get left behind, because there's more. The reliance on other sectors outside this conversation is quite heavy. You know, I talk about the NHS, the health, and all this kind of stuff. You know, so it's our reliance on those other sectors and wider agendas is quite massive, really.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy. You're on mute.
On mute. Hi. Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I have in Doncaster, I have oversight strategically for all things to do that. It's in my title's leisure, but it's predominantly physical activity and sport. But I am associated. I'm on the board of the race course, so that's an interesting one you've highlighted there. Because as you say, the two international brands from a leisure point of view. Well, probably three. There's three international brands for South Yorkshire. One is Sheffield Steel. Second is the Ledger. If you go anywhere in the world about racing, you speak about the Ledger, they know the Ledger. And then there is the snooker. So from a branding point of view, that's an interesting one. Also, is that people look at the industry around the Ledger and the race course. We also have Goff Sales, which is one of 3 horse sales that Goffs run in UK and Ireland with considerable amount of money going through it. So we have a bit of an opportunity there to actually bring that racing sector together, and we'll do some work for the 250th Ledger next year on that in Doncaster. From a point of view of workforce, it's an interesting one because there's never been a time of so much change in the leisure industry. You know, if you read the reports in the Times last week around the potential disbanding of DCMS and moving that apart, and how does that go? You know, we've seen the disbandment of the NHS. That does feel like to me that other departments of government will be changed. There is a drive to sort of get rid of the quangos potentially and bring closer together. So what does that mean for the industry? So from a systems point of view, we do a lot of work around systems leadership and thinking here is how do we look at a workforce across the system that is multi-talented and can fit in any area? Because one of the things we have seen is attracting the right workforce and retaining them is a key thing. Now that's when you look at that in Doncaster, for Chris at DCLT, that's an issue. For other leisure trusts, it's an issue. It's an issue for our hospitality industry. It's a big issue for the racecourse, and it's also an issue for our theatre and other organisations in the cultural sector, getting the right people in with the right talent and keeping them. So I think there's a bit of when we look at this workforce and how we develop people and retain them is don't look at it as hospitality, just leisure as in a sports and physical activity point of view, or is it arts and culture? We've got to look at multi-talented staff who can move like a life journey between those as and when the times are right. The other thing we need to consider, we're a gateway industry in leisure to work. So, the pathway to work principles, get Britain working. I think the leisure sector has a big role to play in that because we can bring people in who've been out of work and actually give them that experience and hopefully retain them. But if not, there's nothing wrong with being that gateway to further employment in other sectors. So I think there is a bit to look around that and not just pigeonhole ourselves. This is what we're looking for in that. I think there's also, as you've identified area, there's a bit for the education sector to do here, both at FE and onwards. If I'm being really brutal, staff that come through, they sometimes are selling them a career path which is non-achievable. So we produce lots of sports coaches, lots of people to work in the sports industry. What we need, as you said earlier, is people with people skills, particularly as we pivot to health and well-being more, and that is being in Doncaster and nationally for the leisure industry. So we want people with those skills where they're compassionate, empathetic, they're able to turn their hands to a number of things around people and help them, and then develop a skill set around a technical base, whether that be down pure sports, whether it be that down health and well-being, or whether that's hospitality. But the key to me is having people who've got that empathy and compassion with other people.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Kelvin, do you want to come in? No. Anybody else want to come in that hasn't spoken already, or wants to speak again or make any other points? Lou, did you want to just sort of sum up, and then should we bring Dan in on?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, that was really
fascinating from my point.
I was going to say that was really helpful, actually. Really interesting to have, even though we said we know it's a broad subject, but it's actually really interesting to have people who have really deep knowledge around their own sort of specialism. But I think it was something you said, Andy, it might have been Chris, about everything's interlinked and everything's interdependent on each other. So it's been an interesting, all the insights we've taken from this and the conversations we've had, and how I don't think I'd realised actually how interlinked, and actually how with a small change of the dial, that visitor economy piece, how that can rise the tide really for everyone in South Yorkshire if we can, work a little bit more in collaboration, get a little bit more organised in terms of looking at the opportunities, but also skills pipeline. I thought that was a really interesting reflection around, for some people, some of the roles will be a stepping stone, and that's okay, that's fine, and we should embrace that. But also we should counter that with really profiling some great high-level jobs that exist in these sectors. So it's really aspirational for people. I am going to hand over to Dan, who is just going to summarise and just let us know about timelines and things that are coming up. Obviously, Carl, you're going to share a copy of this report with everybody. Yes. I popped a copy of the slides in the chat. For me, just to thank everybody who's been involved in the interviews and the roundtables for taking part. Thank you for coming today and finding out more. Obviously, they can speak to any of us. I've also put a bookmark to the page on the Doncaster website where the reports are, so you can keep track of. As we said, we're 3 of 7 that are coming, so you can keep track on those reports as well. But from my point of view, thank you to Jack and Carl as well for all the grafting, doing all that and pulling it together. And I'll hand over to Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou.
Thanks, Lou, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar this afternoon. We've been a sort of relatively small, but I think perfectly formed group on this call this afternoon. This is part of a wider series of insight work that the Free South Yorkshire Chambers are continuously collaborating on at the moment. Part of that is the Local Skills Improvement Plan. Another part of that is our quarterly economic survey. And the intent of that is really to sort of gather in as much coal-face sort of business sentiment as we possibly can do in what is an uncertain and rapidly changing world, and kind of to play that insight back to our public sector friends and partners, and in the case of the Local Skills Improvement Plan, those kind of working at senior levels in our kind of education and skills ecosystem. You know, and what we're trying to do is land that insight in, as Andy said earlier, in context of the Department for Media and Culture and Sport, you know, and as we've seen today in kind of the immigration announcements, like, you know, a rapidly shifting kind of policy world. So as a general kind of comment, if it's okay, Lou, I'd just say to all our kind of friends and partners on this call, if it's stuff that's kind of important to you, there's gaps in your data, there's gaps in your intel, there's things you want to know from the employer community, please do reach out to any of the Free South Yorkshire Chambers, and we'll try and kind of plug that into this kind of insight work in some way, shape or form. In terms of the Local Skills Improvement Plan itself, as we've said before, today's visitor economy report is part 3 of 7 in terms of deep dives we are currently on with. We'll be launching the results of, and by the way, none of those are intended to be sort of exhaustive and not intended to be sort of fully authoritative in terms of the sectors we're talking about. You know, what these are as part of a broader package of activity that just is that sort of zeitgeist, you know, 30 or 40 businesses who've got something interesting to say at this particular point in time that we're trying to summarize and sort of play back to a community of interest. You know, it should be sort of read and understood fully in that context. Pending reports are due for the aviation sector on the 29th of May, professional services on the 17th of June, and thereafter reports on AI and sort of getting veterans into work with dates still to be confirmed. And then if you've enjoyed this, you found it helpful, please do pass on those dates and this piece of work to your partners and your colleagues in your own organisations or more broadly that you work with. In terms of what happens next, it's really important we don't just talk to employers and leave that there. We are landing each of these reports via the snappily titled South Yorkshire Skills and Employer Collaboration Board, which has been rebranded from the also snappily titled Local Skills Improvement Fund Board. But hey ho, we have many skills in our region. Naming our partnership boards is perhaps not one of them. But the important bit of that is we're kind of taking this information into a community of interest who can do something with it. And then in the near future, the sort of we said they did response to that will be published on our website alongside these reports, alongside these webinars, so folk know what's happening as a consequence of giving us their time and their insight. And then more broadly on LSIP and skills related activity, we are continuing to run knowledge and skills exchanges, thanks to Chris's brilliant leadership at Sheffield Chamber, where we bring together business advisors, those engaging with business, to upskill them on South Yorkshire skills offer. And we have a LSIP event coming up on the 11th of June, where it'd be good to see you guys at, and we'll talk a bit about what is happening next, the local skills improvement plans, because we now know from Department of Education that they'll be seeking to continue that work from October onwards, and hopefully we can continue in this vein of gathering insight from employers and sharing that with people who can do something about it within our sort of education, skills and economic development worlds. So, final comment, thanks ever so much for your interest in this. If you've enjoyed it, please let your colleagues and your friends know about it. Thanks to Lou and their colleagues at Sheffield Chamber for putting this on. Thanks as always to Carl and Jack for kind of taking us through the research and the work you're doing to help us with LSIPs. Martin, for your insights on behalf of the sector, and to everyone who's given up their time to join us this last hour. We hope to see you at the next one. If it's okay with you, Lou, close it there. Take care, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoon.
Bye. Thank you.